Another big Wisconsin crime story. A Waukesha County judge granted early release to Morgan Geyser. She is one of the two girls involved in that Slender Man stabbing back in May of 2014. Geyser, along with Anissa Weir, stabbed their friend Peyton Lutner 19 times in Davids Park. They were all 12 at the time. Thankfully, Lutner survived. Geyser was found not guilty by reason of mental disease in 2018. She was originally committed to the Winnebago Mental Health Institute to a maximum of 40 years of state mental health supervision. 3 doctors have examined her in the last few months to determine if she's made enough progress to transition back into society.
But when we look at dynamic factors or factors that can be changed, that are amenable to treatment, then her history in the last 10 years also demonstrates several protective factors that she has and factors that are about her that are amenable to intervention and treatment. And at this juncture, I believe make her ready for conditional release.
Now, Weir was granted conditional release in 2021 to live with her father, but she does remain under state supervision.